All right. Are we good to go, Brother Poirier?
It says that we are live, so we are good to go.
All right. Well, I'll just kick it off by welcome everyone to our fifth installment of Keeping Up with the Candidates. We again put these events together to educate brothers and bring elected officials to the table to kind of just share with us what they're doing, where they are, and how we can support the work that they're doing. We usually start our session by allowing our president to bring the welcome. So at this time, I will turn it over to President Jarrell Harvey.
Good evening, everyone. I'm glad and happy to be here. I had to make sure that I'm off mute before I start speaking, but I'm excited about this. As Brother Smith mentioned, this is our fifth installment. Each session has been so informative, insightful, and I look forward to continuing that tonight with Councilwoman Watlington. I'm extremely interested in hearing what she has to say as she represents my district as I live in the Still Creek area. And so excited about the things that she's doing for our community, and just happy that we could continue to provide this service not only to our brotherhood but also to the city of Charlotte and other citizens at large. And so again, thank you, and I look forward to hearing and participating tonight.
Thank you, Brother Harvey. At this time, we will turn the platform over to Councilwoman Watlington to do an introduction about herself and how she got where she is, and then allow her to some time to talk about her platform and the accomplishments that she had in the office so far. And Brother Poirier and I mentioned to her about mentioning something about the 2040 plan, which is what a lot of people are interested in. And then after that, we'll take questions if we have it, or us that are on this call currently, we'll jump into any questions. So Councilman Watlington, I will turn it over to you. Use as much time as you like at this time.
Awesome, thank you. Well, first of all, greetings to the Brothers of Beta Nu Lambda chapter of Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. I appreciate you all inviting me to come out, and I thank you for all of the work that you all are doing. I see so many of you everywhere as we're doing the work. So thank you for being about the business. I am Victoria Watlington, your Charlotte City Council member representing District 3. District 3 is everything west of South Boulevard, if you're looking at the map, and everything south of Freedom Drive. And it goes all the way out informally past the ETJ to the Catawba and to the county line. I don't technically represent those of you that are in the unincorporated part of the county, but you will find, if you haven't already, that I will represent you just the same. I see Mr. Smith chuckling because we worked on some things over in the Northwest area. And I'm passionate about people regardless of whether you live in the city or not. I live here right off of West Boulevard. I am a District 3 resident now of 12 years. I moved to Charlotte from the University of Florida, where I graduated with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering back in 2009. I moved out to Still Creek, where I lived for 5 years, and then moved here off of West Boulevard. So very near and dear to my heart is the West Side. And that is really how I got into service. I started out with my neighborhood organization. So for those of you who are looking to get involved, looking to understand how you can bring more of an impact to your community, start there, right there with your neighbors. Start to get to know the people on your street. I started as the secretary of my neighborhood association and was able to get involved with organizing our master plan and our plans for the year in regards to different projects and things we were doing. And there's a particular tool that is still available today. It's called Request a Speaker that you can go online and utilize. And what it is it allows you to request particular speakers from any department in the city or in the county to come out and speak to you and your neighbors about that particular area of expertise, whether it's code enforcement or housing and neighborhood services, you name it. And so from that, I began to learn more and more about the community and had an opportunity to take advantage of the Community Planning Academy that was put on by the planning department. And during the Community Planning Academy, we learned about zoning and its impact on Charlotte and how we ended up, quote unquote, a tale of two cities. It talked about redlining. It talked about urban renewal and the impact of housing discrimination on the outcomes of residents in our city. And so that is what I would call my light bulb moment. And I remember sitting in the class and thinking, if we got here by design, we've got to be intentional about designing our way out of it. And that is the approach that I have taken to community service and the public service since I've been in office, in that if we truly understand what the root causes of things are, then we can start to address the issues systemically to actually get the outcomes that we desire. And so from that moment, I started to learn as much as I could. I was able to attend all 4 of the city's academies, including CMPD Citizens Academy, the Civic Leadership Academy put on by Housing and Neighborhood Services, and also the Charlotte Airport's Aviation Academy, where we learned about the airport operations and how it ran and some of the master plan out there. As you all, I'm sure, know, the airport is a huge economic engine, not only for our city, but for our state. It's about 5% of our GDP for the state. So it is a critically important or enterprise in our district. And as you probably know, it sits in District 3. And so from there, I was invited to join the board of the West Boulevard Neighborhood Coalition, which is an organization that's comprised of 17 neighborhoods along the West Boulevard corridor. And our role, or my role on the board, was the Land Use Committee chair. And so as the Land Use Committee chair, I focused on making sure that our area plan, or what we ended up calling the playbook, reflected the will of our community. We live in an area that, because it is situated between the airport, the upcoming river district, and the burgeoning South End that's moving further west, it was very important that the residents that lived here previously were able to get together and align on what they wanted to see. This playbook then has become the launching pad and the pilot of how we are moving throughout the city as we prepare for this comprehensive 2040 plan, and how we're engaging with our neighborhoods and learning what it is that people need, not only from a land use standpoint, but from an economic development standpoint, from a school standpoint, everything that impacts the quality of life of a community, we wanted to include in that plan. And that's the approach that we've been taking with our Corridors of Opportunity program. We launched, as you I'm sure know, on Beatty's Ford and also on West Boulevard. And that entire program was launched last year with $25 million. And we've included more money and are getting a private match this year in this fiscal 2022's budget in order to continue that work. And it's focused on economic mobility, business recruitment, beautification, transportation improvements, you name it, it's in the Corridors of Opportunity program. And it's really about not just improving the place or the built environment, but also improving the lives of the residents who live along the corridors today and the residents that are moving in. So from that, my work with the West Boulevard Neighborhood Coalition and several other organizations, including United Way, Central Carolinas, we knew that my predecessor was going to be moving on from this role. And so because of that, my neighborhood community leaders asked me to step up. And it was the time, and I had been leading the work on the community side. And so it made sense then to come to the city, to the government center as a representative, and not only be a part of doing the work on the community side and envisioning, but making sure that it was implemented and that those priorities were assigned dollars and resources so that we could execute the work. And so I'm happy that we've been able to do a lot of that despite having a very challenging year coming out of 2020. I certainly did not expect that within 3 months of assuming office that we would be in a global pandemic. But I will say that it has been extremely gratifying to be able to focus on the work. You, as I'm sure all of you experience, so many things that come at you as a part of day-to-day life went away during the pandemic. And for many of us, we were able to use that time to really get clear about our own priorities. And so I was able to come in and learn our systems, really work on policy, given that I came in with the playbook and having lived in Still Creek for 5 years, I know what the issues are in Still Creek. I've experienced trying to get home on 160 and 40 or South Tryon and Still Creek Road. I know that it's not just about getting back to your own community and not wanting to engage. Still Creek residents have been very engaged, very active. The Still Creek Resident Association has been in existence for 40 years. They've got some of the most robust zoning and community development processes. And so those things were things that I knew coming into office that we wanted to make sure that were lifted up. And so with that, I was able to come in and focus on 4 key areas. And those areas were community-led planning, affordable housing, transportation, and economic mobility. So when I say community-led planning, that really focuses on that West Boulevard playbook kind of work. The Northwest Community Alliance has done fantastic work here in the last year and a half in regards to mobilizing residents out in our Northwest area of District 3, and really starting to envision what is it that we want to see out here? What kinds of amenities do we need in the community? What kinds of issues are we wanting to address in concert with the Freedom Advisory Council and other organizations? When we looked at how did we want to make sure that residents in District 3 were represented on our boards and commissions. So the city of Charlotte has over 35 boards and commissions, and District 3 in particular was in need of increased representation. And so I've been able to work with my colleagues to appoint additional District 3 representatives. And right now, the focus right now is to get someone from District 3 on the Planning Commission. Though we had the most rezonings in the city last year, we had a 49, I believe, rezonings here in the city. We don't have a single representative on the Planning Commission, despite having the largest district by landmass. So that is definitely something that we want to address, because it hits different when it's your neighborhood, right? And that's the thing that I want to make sure that as we are doing this work and as we are making decisions, it's not about the others or it's not about them, but it's about us. Everybody's got to have skin in the game, right? So that's the community-led planning piece. And I'm, like I said, I've been so proud of the work that the Southwest Area Neighborhood Coalition has done, the Freedom Community Partners in partnership with Greater Enderley Park. We've got a lot of very capable and committed neighborhood leaders working. So thank you for that. And if you are interested in getting involved in that capacity, the first place you can start is the Neighborhood Organization Contact List. And you can reach that list literally by just going to Google and put the Neighborhood Organization Contact List, Charlotte, and it'll take you to our Housing and Neighborhood Services website. And you can sign up there and start to get updates about what's going on in the city when neighborhood matching grant opportunities come up, when different trainings come up, you can find it there. And I'm happy to drop those in the chat later on or send a follow-up email to make sure you guys have that information about how to engage. The next thing, as I said, was affordable housing. And so when we talk about affordable housing, it's not just about having affordability, but it's about how do we couple affordable housing with economic mobility. And so what does that look like in terms of mixed income developments? What does that look like in terms of home ownership? So I was able to champion the Westside Community Land Trust by ensuring that they got about $400,000 in our budget this past year. And I've been working with them through the rezoning process to acquire land through community benefits agreements with the developers. So before, what would happen is a developer would come and offer up a project, and they would negotiate with the district rep. Well, the approach that I have taken is that you're not negotiating with me. You're negotiating with the community, and I represent what the community wants to do. And so I've been very, very pleased with how some of our development partners have taken to that conversation, and I've been able to facilitate those connections between the community. And there have been different, like I said, community benefit agreements and MOUs that have come up with our neighborhood organizations and our coalitions that have done some pretty innovative things here lately, including, like I was saying, conveying actual land over to the Westside Community Land Trust. Part of the work that we need to do as a city, and I'm not sure if you all were able to catch the budget workshop this week, but we referred basically, I don't want to say an overhaul of the Housing and Neighborhood Services work, because Pam Weidman, our Director of Housing and Neighborhood Services, is fantastic. She is absolutely amazing. Other cities will tell you that. Why are you talking to us? Go talk to Pam. She's at the leading edge of this. But we really, really want to focus on home ownership now. And so that is something that through the Westside Community Land Trust and other organizations like the Lakeview Alliance, that we want to make sure that we are prepared to, in some ways, act as our own developer on public land. And how do we make sure that we are partnering in ways that make sense so that people can not only have somewhere to live through rental property, but also have some equity and ownership in our community. So that's affordable housing. The next piece was transportation. So for those of you that live in Still Creek, I mentioned before, trying to get home at certain times pre-pandemic was a nightmare, right? 49 and 160, if you live in Still Creek, you know that 160, the widening of 160 has been delayed numerous times. And right now we are on at least a 10-year horizon. So it's not getting better. So the first thing that I wanted to do to help mitigate congestion in Still Creek and improve the quality of life of people that live in Still Creek was to advocate for rezonings away from Still Creek, right? So there's by right development, and then there's development that you can only do if you rezone the land to show what it is that you want to build. So if you want to build, say, an apartment complex, but it's zoned for a single family residential, you cannot do that without going through the rezoning process. And so was able to work with the residents, like I said, the Still Creek Resident Association and the organizations along 160 to really get focused and communicate with developers that, hey, our priorities in this area is to really ensure that we've got connectivity here. So what that means is that we want to direct development in other areas in Still Creek where we have increased connectivity. So focused on that. And then in the meantime, working with my state senator and state reps to try to really push for investments in Still Creek. But on the city side, one thing that we've been able to do is through that rezoning process, we've been able to acquire additional dollars in private development dollars to improve intersections, to do signal improvements, to do lane extensions. So we don't have $60 million to widen 160, and we don't have another 90 to widen 49, but what we can do through small improvements is to try to create better connectivity at our nodes. And so that's what we've been doing. And in addition to that, I was able to advocate along with a couple of my colleagues for $14 million in congestion mitigation funds in last year's budget, with $5 million specifically earmarked for Still Creek. So Still Creek is one of the priority congestion mitigation areas. So that's the transportation side of things. From an economic mobility standpoint, I did want to talk a little bit about, excuse me, from an economic mobility standpoint, I did want to talk a little bit about the work that I was able to do with former council member James Mitchell in pushing for a workforce development commitment in all of our public contracts. So we already have things in there in regards to diversity and inclusion, in regards to making sure that our MWSBEs are participating in public contracts, but we also wanted to make sure that not only are we participating in that way, but we also want to make sure that folks, particularly in District 3 in zip codes like 28208 that were hit the hardest in the pandemic in terms of unemployment, that they're able to connect those opportunities. If we're spending public dollars, like Councilmember Mitchell used to say, public dollars are for public good. So we wanted to make sure that we were really tying those workforce development opportunities in as well. So those were the 4 key areas that I've been focused on. A couple of other things that I was able to work on was advocating for another $300,000 for the West Boulevard Neighborhood Coalition, as well as the Three Sisters Market, which is a co-op. It's the first of its kind in its city, and it's focused on a membership-based model to grocery. And so that's about food access in food deserts. And then also on top of a pandemic last year, I'm sure you all remember that we had to reckon with some of our own social injustices here in our city. And so I had an opportunity to actually draft the framework for our existing Safe Charlotte program, where we went through and reevaluated our policing organization with our budget, with our resources, with our approach to our policies, and was able to do a significant amount of work there. We're not where we want to be, but we are proud to be able to say that we're one of the only cities in the US that can meet all of the measures of 8 Can't Wait. And as you all probably have seen, we've recently been able to fund 17 grassroots organizations with $50,000 in partnership with the United Way in order to fund violence interruption. And then earlier this week, we launched an additional violence interruption program along with Greenlight Fund, who's also put up another, I believe, $1 million towards the effort over along Beatty's Ford Road. So those are some of the things that I've been busy with. Right now, we are, as you know, focused on the budget and the Comp 2040 plan. And so when we look at the budget, it's really about how do we amplify what we've been doing, what's worked, and how are we going to be able to continue that momentum and make sure that we are laser focused on continuing to deliver some of the initiatives we started last year. And when it comes to Comp 2040, right now, actually, there is a community conversation going on. So after you finish here, when you get a moment, check that out. We are still in the public comment process. We just got the second draft delivered to us with the initial round of updates from the Comp 2040 plan, but we're not finished yet. We plan to adopt the plan next month, but we've got a ways to go. I've been reviewing it line by line with the planning director and planning staff this week, and plan to continue that work to make sure that the comp plan reflects what it is that our community wants to see, and that it's something that is not only aspirational, but something that is actually executable. Because what we don't want to do is put something on paper that sounds good, but in reality doesn't deliver the outcome. So we've got to be data-based, we've got to be transparent, we've got to bring the community to the table at the right decision points to make sure that what we're doing is reflecting what folks are asking for. We want to be visionaries. We know that we've got 400,000 people that we anticipate coming to this city over the next 20 years. But we also know that we already have affordability issues. We also know that we already have issues in terms of economic mobility. So what are we going to do different? It's going to be effective. And so that's where my focus is right now on the Comp 2040 plan, is where do we want to be, and how realistically are we going to get there? And do we have a compelling reason to believe that what we are saying we're going to do is going to deliver the results? So definitely would love you all's input. Please, if you haven't already looked at the Comp 2040 plan, it's available online. You can go to the Charlotte Future website and see all 3 volumes there. We have since split up the original draft into 3 different volumes that are focused on the policy itself, and that comprises our 10 goals for our community. Then the second volume is about implementation. What are the short-term and long-term next steps? And then the third volume is more along the lines of what is it that we're going to do when it comes to regulatory issues like our UDO. So the way it's going to work is we will have the policy, and that policy sets up the framework for our placemaking process. So every lot in the city is going to be rezoned. And through that process, we are going to set up these, what we call place types. And there are 10 place types. And it's essentially how you would loosely describe an area, right? There's a difference between South End and Ballantyne. When you think about building height, when you think about how people get around, when you think about the types of uses and where they are in relation to each other, those are things that are described in place types, whether it's manufacturing and logistics areas, whether it's low density neighborhoods or mid density neighborhoods or transit oriented development. Those are all of the different those types, or those are examples of the types of place types. And so what the intention is that each community is going to come together and put together their place types. What do they envision? How do we want to grow? And then that is going to be translated into our unified development ordinance. So when I say unified, am I talking too much? Y'all with me? Okay. When I say unified development ordinance, right now we've got several different types of actual regulations, right? We've got policies, but it is only legally enforceable once it becomes a part of our city regulations. And so we've got like a tree ordinance, we've got subdivision ordinances, we've got transit-oriented development ordinances. All of those are going to be combined along with our land use ordinance into one unified development ordinance. And it's going to give direction to developers about how we're going to grow, not only horizontally, if you will, what the land's going to look like, but vertically as well. It includes building standards and those kinds of things as well. So that's Comp 2040. So the piece for you is review the plan, take a look at it, the 10 goals, make sure that it aligns with what you want to see. We did do a lot of community engagement for the last couple of years. I actually, as a resident, was able to be involved with one of the first sessions over here at Greater Mount Sinai, where we talked about what it is that we want to see and how we want it to grow. And overwhelmingly, the community wants to have different types of housing in different areas, focused on transportation corridors, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to increase density in places where you don't have infrastructure, for instance. So how do those things go on top of each other? In addition to that, as we totally understand, I don't want to say totally, many of us understand that because of the history of the city, we've got the crescent and we've got the wedge. And if you were to go to the Quality of Life Explorer, which is another fantastic tool where you can see socioeconomic stats of our community layered on top of each other. If you were to go to look at it, we are divided in virtually every socioeconomic measure. So with that, one of the things that is significant about the wedge is that our neighborhoods are changing rapidly, right? Because of their close proximity, because of their relatively cheaper land. So we have to think about how, as we're building, are we protecting folks, and we're making sure that our most vulnerable neighborhoods are stable. So that's another component of the plan. People have different needs in various parts of the city. So how do we make sure that we're not just focused on equality, but equity, true equity? So with that, I will pause. I've spoken, I'm sorry now, for 30 minutes. I'll stop and see if anybody's got any questions.
Go ahead.
So you were just talking about protecting the neighborhoods, but you're also talking about the revised zoning and limitations on structures. So I live in McCrory Heights. We're pursuing historic designation, and we're fearful of people coming in and building up on top of our neighborhoods. So there's a little, if we don't get our historic designation, I'm a little concerned about what's going to come up around it.
I understand that wholeheartedly. I understand it wholeheartedly. And that's the crux, right? And that's that thread. We really got to make that needle. We've got a thread is, how do we think about this smartly? What is it that we really are looking for, right? If what we're looking for is opportunities for people to have different types of housing, for people to be able to have economic mobility through home ownership, because we know that in this country, home ownership is one of the foundational steps of being able to build generational wealth. How do we do that in a way that also allows people to have access to transportation so that they can get to jobs, so that they can get to food, they can get to healthcare? And to me, it's about taking it down to that next level, right? And really understanding what are the root causes of what we're dealing with here. My neighborhood is very similar to McCrory Heights. We also have a lot of non-owner occupied dwellings, right? We've had a lot of investors come in and purchase homes.
No, we don't have a lot of investors over here. A lot of home owner occupied.
No, I'm saying in addition to ours, in addition to your neighborhood in McCrory Heights, we have the added issue of non-owner occupied homes. And so because of that, we know that the research tells us that there is a decrease in neighborhood collective efficacy when you have a decrease in home ownership, right? You get a more kind of transient population, that kind of thing. And so we got to figure out how to engage people, regardless of whether you're a homeowner or a renter in your neighborhood, so that you feel like you've got something, you've got a reason to want to lean in and be a part of the community. But with that, we've also got to figure out, how do we enable people who want to enter the housing market to actually have something to buy? When you look at our naturally occurring affordable housing, it tends to happen in particular neighborhoods that have been historically disadvantaged. Well, if people are coming in and buying with cash, that the owner occupant home buyer really doesn't have a leg to stand on. So we've got to look at, how do we tailor our city programs in such a way that it's actually going to make people competitive in the market? Because I've said it several times, my view is that government exists to correct market failures. But if we don't understand where the failure is happening in the market, we can't combat it. So there's that component of it, right? Then the other side of it is, when you look at how do we create zoning that enables us to grow the way we want to without creating unnecessary risk, right? So in my neighborhood, because the land is relatively cheap, it's the same reason that when you look at housing trust fund dollars, you see all of the affordable housing projects happening in the Crescent and not in places where we're actually trying to get greater access, right? Because land is not as cheap. So what is an investor going to do who owns a collection of homes in a neighborhood that now is able to, for relatively little capital, create duplexes and triplexes and things that are generally rental product in this state, unless they go through a condominium? If you're incentivizing the market to do things that create a level of instability or accelerate a level of instability in these particular neighborhoods, then that's something that's an unintended consequence, right? So we've got to think about, what are we really trying to do? How do we go down and look at each of our neighborhoods and say, what are you close to? Do you have, I'll say, corridors or arterial roads that it makes sense because you've got public transit that directly ties along these streets, where it makes sense to go ahead and put in greater density here because it's actually going to benefit the people? But when you do, this is my personal opinion, when you create rezonings or when you create zoning designations that do not require developers to come to the table to rezone, what you're essentially doing is allowing by right development. And so what that means is you can be increasing density without getting anything in terms of infrastructure. That's a problem. What that means is that when you talk about community benefit agreements, there's no opportunity for communities to come to the table and say, hey, in exchange for us allowing you to rezone, these are some of the things that are important to us and our priorities. So we've got to figure out what mix of tools enables us to meet all of the goals. And right now there are definitely some disconnects that we've got to work through to make sure that we don't end up looking up and saying, ooh, we had a really good idea, but we didn't execute it well. And so for me, that is what I'm focused on, because I live in one of these neighborhoods that does not have a historic designation. We do not have a deed restriction. We do not have an HOA. And so when you talk about who's really going to be impacted, you better make sure that you are protecting the folks that you're trying to help create some parity for. So that's my take on it.
Mm-hmm. Councilman Watlington, I have a question. It's fascinating to hear the different take on the 2040 plan and the example that you just used about why when we don't have folks come to the table in terms of the rezoning process is really interesting. I am curious, you know, you have so much detail and knowledge of this, but you know, I've just seen massive displacement go on on the west side of Charlotte. To the point where it's just insanity. You're like riding down the street and all of a sudden all the homes that were there are no longer there. Mm-hmm. In your opinion, you know, and as we look at this comprehensive 2040 plan, are we going to be preventing that sort of massive amounts of displacement that is going on, or is that inevitable in what's happening in our city?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I think that if what we're saying is we're going to continue to try to recruit companies that have high earners, we've got to acknowledge the fact that the market is going to respond in a way that is predictable, right? When you think about rational choice theory, people are going to make decisions to maximize their utility. And so what that means is if I've got people moving in that have high salaries, perhaps have nest eggs, they were able to sell their homes in the north and move south, there's people that are in business to make money are going to make choices that get them more money, right? And so if we're going to focus on industries where the employees are high earners, we've got to acknowledge who is it that we are trying to be. We cannot say that we are a community that wants all kinds of different people in our community of various income levels, but focus our recruitment on only one sector, if you will, or one socioeconomic status, because what that does is it creates a lot of the displacement and things that you saw. If you can buy a house as an investor for $100,000, tear it down and put up a $400,000 home, and you know somebody's going to buy it within a day that you put it on the market, we don't have enough money in government to stop that. But what we can do and what we should do, what we are absolutely compelled to do, is use our tools to ensure that while the market is doing what the market does, that the people on the margins are not disproportionately impacted. And so I think that starts with acknowledging, what are we trying to do here? If we want to be San Francisco, then just say that, because then we can focus our resources on building better infrastructure so that people can get from Gaston County into Mecklenburg County, right? But let's not say that we want to make sure that people can stay in place, but don't create programs that are effective in allowing people to do so, right? We know that displacement is happening because people who own their homes are selling them, which you want people to be able to access the equity in their homes if they so choose. But if that's the case, let's think about how do we start engaging longtime homeowners before they're ready to sell, or how do we educate seniors on estate planning? What are your options? That's one of the things that the Westside Community Land Trust has really been focused on, is letting folks know that, hey, if you care about community benefit, if you want to, this is something that you can leave a legacy by partnering with the land trust, and we will buy your home. Maybe you won't get as much money as you would have gotten in the private sector, but still fair with relatively fair market value. And if we as the city or the county subsidize that to make sure that that buyer is, or that seller is whole, then that's a potential opportunity to retain affordability, right? We've got to be able to I don't want to say infiltrate, but I'll use that word, infiltrate the market at places where it makes sense. Because if you leave it to when a house goes on the market, we're not going to be competitive trying to purchase it. So how do we get people to buy into this vision? Because that's what I hear, even as Mr. Jones was just talking, neighbors want to ensure that their neighborhood character remains and that their neighborhood remains stable. So if that's the case, how do we help folks do that on the front end? Because by the time Big Mama passes away and there's 3 people's names on the deed who don't need to live in the house, don't live here anymore, they're just trying to get it off the books, which I can understand that. So we gotta be more proactive in that way. Does that answer your question?
It does. It's helpful. Thank you.
Councilwoman, I want to ask a little bit. Now, I don't live in this area, but I know I get very frustrated when I go to this area because my doctor is out in the Steel Creek area. I've been in Charlotte 8 years, and in the 8 years I've been in Charlotte, there always been conversation about widening or expanding Steel Creek, putting more resources specifically on South Tryon. I'll give you an example. I went to my doctor's office. This is pre-COVID, early last year, and I was in traffic from where the Earth Fair is. So I think that's South Tryon and Old Steel Creek Road or something like that.
Rivergate, yep.
Rivergate. From that location to the 485 freeway took me 1 hour and 20 minutes. And I'm talking coming back into the city at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I know you mentioned a little bit in your introduction about the work that you're piloting to kind of help expand Steel Creek and bring more resources to help with the traffic. I guess my question is, what's the time frame on that? If you could speak to that a little bit, because I know there were some benchmarks set, and then that was taken off the table. Then some more plans came, and then that was taken off the table. So if you could speak to that part. And then my second question is, well, I have 3 questions. So I'll just ask all of them.
Let me write them down.
Answer the best you can. First one is Steel Creek. The second one, you have mentioned community benefits agreement several times. I don't know if everyone on this Zoom or those that are watching understand or know what a community benefits agreement is. So if you could share that a little bit. And then lastly, if you could speak on, for those of us who live closer to where the Silver Line will be running, if you could speak a little bit about the plan for the Silver Line, and if I am a homeowner in the area, what should I be doing, to your point, to preserve my home and my community so I can reap some of that benefit when that Silver Line comes running up Wilkerson. Sorry, had to get all my questions out.
No, you're fine. So the first one, Steel Creek project timelines, they vary because a lot of the infrastructure improvements are project specific. So for instance, Pulte had the large swath of land where they came in and really just did incredible work. I believe it ended up being 15 different improvements at 7 different intersections, some of which are not even near their site, is a good faith effort to improve connectivity in the area. So as those projects come online, you will see those improvements, because part of the agreements are that those improvements have to be completed before they can start building out the ground, right? So those will vary. Still 160, that is on NCDOT's timeline. And so, as you said, it's been bumped a few times, and we really just, at the local level, we don't know when it's actually going to come on board. What we do know is that the State Transportation Improvement Plan, or the STIP, is data-based. And so they basically look across the state and see, well, where are the areas where we have the lowest capacity versus the volume on the roads? And that's how they prioritize where those dollars are going to come from. But as you may know, for the last couple of years, NCDOT has really been trying to figure out how to change their model, because people are driving less, they're getting more fuel efficiency, people are switching to electric cars. So you're starting to see that some of the major line items in their revenue streams are reducing, or they're not keeping pace with the growth. So because of that, we are all waiting with bated breath to find out what NCDOT's plan is going forward. They did commission the NC First stakeholder group, and their job was to benchmark across the country what are the different models in the different states. So I believe they had their last session about a month ago, and so we're waiting for the report out on what that's going to look like, and if it's going to impact what we're trying to do. We've looked at several different things. I looked at commuter tax for folks coming across the line from South Carolina. Well, what we found was that as many people are coming into North Carolina as are going out. So that quickly went away. We looked at a toll road, but nobody has ever done a toll road on an interstate bridge. So if you're going across Lake Wylie trying to come into town, some of the residents will want to look there to see if you could install a toll road there. But that would be something we'd have to engage the federal government because it would then be interstate commerce. So that was something that we ran up against barriers very quickly. I also investigated a municipal service district. And that is essentially a tool where local businesses in an area can come together and basically commit to paying additional property tax to deliver outcomes for the area. It's usually used for smaller things like signs, marketing, that kind of thing. Think like NODA or South End or even Airsley. They don't have a municipal service district, but through the Airwood Business Association, they do some pretty cool things. But anyway, we were looking at how can we generate enough revenue to actually have significant infrastructure improvements. The issue with that, though, was that if we only taxed the people in the city, that it wasn't fair versus the people that were in the county. A significant portion of Still Creek is in unincorporated Mecklenburg County. So we did try to partner with the county to look at, well, how much money could we actually raise? It ended up being about a $4 billion tax base, but that would have meant we would have had to tax the residents too. I'm getting in the weeds. I'm sorry. But anyway, my point is that we've looked at a lot of different
Brother
things.
Harvey don't mind his taxes going up, by the way.
Right. You were nodding. I was surprised you agree with that. But anyway, I say all that to say that the main drivers right now that we can look to for infrastructure improvements is that congestion mitigation dollars that will happen in concert with a lot of the individual development projects that are happening in Still Creek. And so most of them have about a 2-year window. And so we would hope to start seeing those within the next year or two as those projects start to come out the ground. But as far as the larger projects that are state-led on our state roads, it's TBD, unfortunately. So that was your first question. Then your second question was about community benefit agreements. What are they? They really can be anything, honestly. There are so many different examples of community benefit agreements across the country in various states and in various cities. And we in Charlotte, we really haven't figured out specifically what we want our community benefit agreements to look like. What we do know is that community benefit agreements are agreements between the developer and the community. They are private contracts. So we are trying to figure out through an effort with ULI in the next several weeks, what can the city's role actually be in those community benefit agreements? And so it's really a blank slate. They can be used for things like, we want you to invest in food security in this area. We want you to build more connectivity through greenways or additional bus stops. It really can be whatever is important to that community and the developer is willing to agree to do. So like I was mentioning before, the conveyance of land with the land trust. It can be affordability component commitments. It can be community space. They may ask for a community room to be built for use by local neighborhood organizations within that particular project. It is the possibilities are endless. But what we'd like to do is, number one, understand in the state of North Carolina from a legal standpoint, what can our role be? Because obviously the agreement's only as good as it is enforceable. And so when you think about how do we build capacity in our neighborhood organizations so that if something does go awry, they know what to do, because that would not be our issue to deal with from a public standpoint. That would be something they would have to go through litigation and it would be a private matter, right? So we've got to understand more about community benefit agreements, but there is a community benefits coalition headed up by some very familiar names, Ricky Hall, Jatanya Adams, that has been studying this and working with some of the nation's leading experts. So I would encourage you guys to connect with them and they can give you more detail about what they see. We floated an idea around similar to what we do in terms of our TOD benefits. Basically, there's a list of particular things you can choose from this list. Like the way it works with transit-oriented development is, say you want to build higher than the allowable height in this area. Well, we'll let you do that. You can have a density bonus in exchange for affordable housing units within your project. So whereas before you might have just been doing market rate, we'll let you go 2 floors higher if you put affordable units in. So that would be an example of some of the things we may try to do with community benefits agreements. But I don't want to give the impression that we have got a solid plan in regards to that here at the city, because we do not. That's work that we still need to do with ULI. So that's community benefit agreements. I did want to say this. We already do a form of this through our rezoning process, our conditional rezoning process, and it may take the form of a site plan note or something like an MOU between the community organization and the developer. So the concept already exists and we are using it. We just want to formalize that. So then the other thing you asked about was the silver line. So what's the deal with the silver line? I'm gonna refer to a note that I read earlier today in regards to the silver line. Hold on, I want to give it to you because they are moving. As you know, last year, the council, we approved $50 million for the initial design, so that you've probably been involved or seen a lot of the community conversations, and people really just wanted to come out and say, well, what is it that you need the silver line for? What are you looking to do? What stations do you want to see? Where do you try to go in your community that currently you cannot get to? I'm sure anybody who's used public transportation here in Charlotte knows that basically wherever you're going, you're going to have to go through uptown to get there. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? It's one of the reasons that people don't choose to use public transit if they can do something else. And we've got to make public transit, as our CATS director, John Lewis, says all the time, we've got to make it an option that is not the option of last resort. And so in order to do that, we've got to build a line with stations that are at places that you want to go. I'm not seeing it in here right now, but what I do know is that the MTC, our broader Transportation Commission for the region, has approved the current options that we have. And what we're going to do next as we go into the fall is to take ULI again, which is basically this institute out of I believe DC, and start to whittle down the details of the silver line, and is exactly where do we want these stations? What do we want the route to look like? Is it going to be in the street, like Wilkinson, go along Wilkinson? Is it going to be above Wilkinson? It's just that next level of design. And so you'll see some more opportunities to engage with the Silver Line team as we go into the fall there, but it is moving along. So if you live along the Silver Line or nearby, I think the first thing you need to do is figure out, do you still want to be living there when the Silver Line comes through? Because I feel like that is a key decision point, right? Because that's either, how do I make sure that I can stay here? And if I stay here, what do I want my neighborhood to look like? And that's going to require engaging with your neighbors and really, like Mr. Jones was talking earlier, do we need to try to pursue a historic designation for neighborhood stability? Or you need to be thinking about, from an investment standpoint, well, what do I want my exit strategy to be, right? Because you are certainly going to get, I get them all the time, we've been getting them for years, you're certainly going to get those flyers in the mail that we want to buy up your property, right? We, the city, are going to have to purchase land for right-of-way. So that's going to happen. When you look at some of the neighborhoods like historic Camp Green that are right on Wilkinson, there are going to be major impacts there, right? And so those are the things that you need to be thinking about, is this a place that I want to stay? And how do I do that? There's going to be increased property taxes because the land values are going to go up. So what is your plan in regards to your personal finances? You need to be thinking about that. But also there's a lot of good things that can come from the silver line. When you think about, how do we attract businesses to locate along the line and employment centers? How do we make sure that we're advocating for better connectivity, so that if you need to connect to go somewhere, the bus line marries up to the silver line? Be a part of that conversation so that you're not surprised when it shows up, and that you can give input to it. So that's what I would say about what you should be doing if you're a resident on the Silver Line. And then you can always sign up for Silver Line updates as well. They're on Twitter, and they're also at the city website. You can get push notifications to find out when meetings are coming and when major updates to the project is happening.
Great. Any other questions? I know we're pushing on time.
I'm a talker, I apologize.
I have one other question. You also mentioned like the development of like the River District.
Mm-hmm.
Can you provide any kind of like updates on the progress of that?
So it's funny you say that. I get them. Well, I won't speak on what I don't know. When I started before the pandemic, it seemed like River District was moving along. I'm pretty excited about some of the things that are included there. But I need to go back and sit down with the developer and find out what their plan is post-pandemic to continue down that route. We do have some development that's going on there right now. Dixie River Road is going to be extended. It'll take you further down by the outlets closer into Barrowick. And so that's happening in concert with another development project next to the River District. So projects are starting to happen, but the River District as a whole, I need to sit down and get an update on that timeline. So I wouldn't want to speak on something I haven't gotten an update on in a while.
Got another question.
Jones, you was looking like you're trying to get off mute. Go ahead.
What is your position about the arts effort relative to ASC?
Sure. So I'm still learning about it. I sat on a call this week. Aisha Du has been doing an excellent job trying to educate the council on that. I think fundamentally for me, and I don't have a lot of background in the budget and how things were distributed before, but fundamentally we've got to think about how do we remain efficient and effective, right? How do we make sure we get the most out of our dollars? So if it's operating expenses, how do we streamline? Mrs. Smith can tell you that workplace giving is rapidly decreased over recent years, right? So the model's got to change, right? The other piece of it is how do we create a situation where we're enabling authentic arts culture development in our community. We talked months ago about how Nashville was able to create this new production scene in their community because they recruited businesses that productions needed, right? Whether they were curtain manufacturers or whoever, right? So how do we think about the arts as an ecosystem and how do we drive that from an economic development standpoint? I think we've been thinking about it too much like charity. It's not charity, these are professionals and they are providing services and entertainment that can make our city even more of an attractive place to live and an attractive place to visit. So we've got to get more systemic about it as it relates to the manager's plan for funding over the next 3 years. I think it's a good start. We certainly haven't figured out what it's going to look like exactly, which organizations are going to get funded. I will say the Harvey Gantt Center absolutely needs to be funded on par with the rest of the facilities that we fund. So we were able to get that into the budget and make sure that they are taken care of because they have historically been underfunded for what they do. So regardless of how the funds are routed, we want to make sure that the Gantt Center gets the funds that they need to continue their work. But I am cautiously optimistic. I am open to seeing how this could particularly work. And ultimately, for me, the goal is make sure that the organizations that ultimately need these funds are getting more of the funds. So if it doesn't work, we pivot, right? The ASC is not going anywhere anytime soon. That's my take on it. I don't have I'll say crystal ball, if you will, to say I don't think it's going to work or it's going to work. But I think whatever we do, it cannot be an adversarial thing. It's got to be, guys, how do we help everybody deliver what we need to deliver and what role does each organization play in it? But we'll see how it goes. But I'd love to hear what you think. I mean, educate me. Like I said, this is not my area of expertise, but I'm happy to take perspective back.
Well, I can't educate you for so much because it's not where I deal with. So I'm trying to figure out what's broken and what are we trying to fix, and how is the plan going to fix what's broken. If it's a matter of directing funds, have we tried that, and why? What's not working? And I don't know if the model's so broken. I mean, giving, yeah, it's gone down. We all know that. This doesn't sound like a solution to the giving model. So it sounds like it's some other stuff in there, but
that's fair. Does anybody else have a take on that? I'm just curious.
I know the quarter-cent tax may not have been I don't know. That didn't. The quarter-cent tax didn't seem to work when.
Yeah.
That model didn't work.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we're pushing on time. If you know me, I like to start and end my meetings on time. I do want to say a few words before we close. First and foremost, I want to thank the councilwoman for making herself available to share the wealth of knowledge. Outside of Councilman Watlington being a very, very good friend of mine, she's someone who I actually look up to. A lot of these elected officials, they get into office, they come to our meetings like this, or come to our community meetings and say they're all about the people. And then when they get into the office, they're easily swayed by the ones with the most money. So AKA developers and people who are telling them what to do. One thing I can say about Councilwoman Watlington, outside of her being my friend, she has always been about the people from the day she got in office. I'll give you an example. There was a developer, and I apologize, my sinus is kicking my butt. That's why I'm tucking out my nose. But there was a developer trying to come into my area, the 28214 area. Myself and a friend of mine, Susie, started what we call the Northwest Community Alliance to combat developments that are coming to this community that doesn't come with amenities that help the community. So a developer is trying to come into this community, and they did everything they could to try to convince Councilman Watlington to hurry up and pass the development through so they can build whatever they want to build and move on. Well, Councilman Watlington, speaking of community benefits agreement, Councilman Watlington said, well, I have no interest in talking to you if you have engaged the community. What do the community want? Yeah, they may want the apartments, but what else are you going to do for the community? And it took the developer almost 3 months aggressively working with us, and we pretty much changed their whole scope of that project. They wanted to come and put affordable apartments in our area. Now, we don't knock that type of development, but just don't build the structure, the face type of it can't look like anything. So we work with the developer to change what the apartment's going to look like. We also had them change what the monthly payment per se will be. So instead of making it affordable, it's 80% of AMI. So now we're talking about police officers, firefighters, teachers. They're the ones that are going to be coming to this community, and they're the ones that are going to help us drive amenities into this community. So I say all that to say, typically prior to Councilman Watlington, and some other council people who are really about the community, like Matt Newton, typically what will happen, the developer will come to them, they'll do some backdoor deal. Next thing you know, the council person is allowing that development to happen. But I can speak for Councilman Watlington, since she's been in office, that I have not seen that happen in District 3. So I say all that to say this is one of our most authentic council people. That's one of the reasons why I look up to her, because she is truly about the people. She's truly about letting the people drive what the community want to see. So Councilwoman Watlington, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. And brothers, thank you for being here today. If you have any follow-up materials, Councilman Watlington, if you could send that to myself or Kevin, we'll make sure that information get out to the chapter. And again, just want to say thank you, and brothers, thank you, and everyone have a great and blessed. I think this is Memorial Day, not Labor Day, but yeah, it's Memorial Day. Everyone have a blessed Memorial Day. I always get those two mixed up. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Tell Mary I said hello.